let's continue our discussion from the last issue. After talking about the Fed's dot plot, let's explore the relationship between tariffs and inflation. Now, let's shift our focus from the grand policy debate in Washington to the specific things that are closely related to our lives. The best way to understand the true relationship between tariffs and inflation is not to look at economists' models, but to listen to the stories of those struggling on the front lines of production. An in-depth report titled, How Tariffs Make Food and Beer Cans More Expensive, published by the New York Times on June 19, 2025 provides us with an excellent sample. The protagonist of the story is Pacific Coast Producers, a fruit canning cooperative in California. For many years, their biggest cost was growing peaches, pears and tomatoes, the fruits themselves. But since 2018, the situation has changed. Their biggest expense has become the cans for fruit. The reason behind this is tariffs. About 80% of the special tinplate used to make food cans needs to be imported from abroad. The Trump administration's doubling of tariffs on imported steel has directly led to a surge in can costs. Matt Strong, the CEO of the cooperative, did the math. If the tariffs continue, the cost of their next order of tin cans could increase by an additional $40 million. He said frankly, we can't absorb these costs. As a business with annual revenue of $1.1 billion, he expects to have to increase the wholesale price of each can by as much as 10 cents to cover the increased expenses. And in the end, these costs are likely to be passed on to every consumer shopping in the supermarket through retailers. This story vividly illustrates the true meaning of Powell's statement that someone has to pay for tariffs. Inflation is not an abstract macroeconomic data. It will eventually be reflected in the price tag of the can of peaches or ketchup in your shopping cart or mine. Even more ironic is that the declared goal of the tariff policy is to protect the domestic steel industry and stimulate investment. But the reality is just the opposite. According to the Can Manufacturers Association, in the years after Trump implemented the first round of tariffs in 2018, instead of increasing, 9 tinplate production lines in the United States were closed, leaving only 3 still in operation. Steel giants such as U.S. Steel and Cleveland-Cliffs have reduced their tinplate businesses in recent years. The latter even closed a plant in West Virginia in 2024. This reveals a cruel reality: tariffs have not brought back manufacturing and revived domestic industries as policymakers envisioned. On the contrary, it has failed to achieve its core goals while pushing up costs for downstream companies and consumers. As Mr. Strong said, the collateral damage of these tariffs is huge. We don't have enough domestic tinplate production. We are trying to save an industry that doesn't exist at all. It's not just food cans, the beverage industry is facing the same problem. Aluminum cans used to make beer, soda and energy drinks have also been severely affected by tariffs. Although most of the raw materials for aluminum cans come from recycling, about 30% of new aluminum still needs to be imported. Over the past 5 years, manufacturers' prices for steel cans have soared 67%, while aluminum cans have risen 26%. Some craft brewers are considering switching from aluminum cans to glass bottles to avoid high costs. Coca-Cola CEO James Quincey even said they might switch to more plastic packaging if aluminum prices soar. The response strategies of these companies reflect the true logic of the market. When a cost rises, people will spontaneously look for alternatives. This substitution process is inherently full of uncertainty. Rick Huther, the owner of a custom can manufacturer in Maryland, said Trump's erratic stance on tariffs has brought chaos to the entire supply chain. He now only dares to order expensive tin-plated steel plates after getting a firm contract from a customer. He is more worried that if prices remain high, his customers, such as popcorn companies, may completely abandon metal cans and switch to cheaper plastic buckets. These stories from the fields and factory floors tell us that the impact of tariffs on the economy is far more complicated and confusing than macro models predict. It is not a simple, cost-plus problem, but a dynamic process that will trigger a chain reaction, change the business model, and reshape the supply chain. In this process, there is another possibility. Due to the sharp increase in the cost of certain commodities, manufacturers will be prompted to shift the supply chain or adopt other materials and processes to reduce costs. At the same time, consumers will adapt to this price increase by changing their consumption habits, making the impact of tariffs on inflation milder. In addition, the products affected by tariffs are only a part of people's daily consumer goods, among which the commodities with a sharp increase in tariffs are part of this part. Therefore, economists' views on the impact of tariffs on inflation are largely based on the results of linear deductions from book knowledge, rather than the complex real world. Faced with the analytical conclusions of economists, we should remain sober. Of course, there is also such a possibility. As the Wall Street Journal pointed out, if companies cannot pass on the increased costs to consumers due to fierce market competition, then their profits will be damaged. The consequence of this profit squeeze may not be inflation, but companies lay off employees in order to cut costs, which will eventually lead to rising unemployment. So, will tariffs eventually lead to a significant increase in prices, or increase in unemployment, or both? No one knows the exact answer. This is the biggest dilemma facing the Fed, and it is also the core that we as investors need to understand. The real world is full of possibilities, and any view that attempts to explain everything with a single narrative is one-sided. In the process of trying to understand the economy and the market, we are accustomed to turning to two types of people: media reporters and economists. They are considered experts, who can provide us with professional interpretations and predictions. However, through the analysis of the previous chapters, it is not difficult to find that the views of these experts often have huge blind spots. Let's go back to the Fed's press conference. In the live commentary of the New York Times, reporter Ben Castleman himself couldn't help but joke that people had reason to make fun of the way those Fed observers analyzed every word of Powell. But he immediately said that there is indeed a difference between mildly restrictive and moderately restrictive, as he said a few months ago. This detail is very interesting. On the one hand, it illustrates the normal state of media work, digging out as much meaning as possible from limited information, but on the other hand, it also exposes the limitations of this method. When the entire market's attention is focused on the slight difference between two synonyms, we are likely to have lost our way and ignored the bigger picture that Powell repeatedly emphasized: abnormal uncertainty. The media's frenzy of coverage of the dot plot is another typical example. They simplified a data snapshot, full of divergences and dynamic changes, into a guiding median, and used it to construct a clear and linear policy path narrative. Although this narrative is eye-catching, it sacrifices complexity and authenticity, giving investors an illusion that everything is under control. It's like seeing only the tip of the iceberg and ignoring the huge and dangerous subject under the water. Economists face another dilemma, which we can call the dilemma of blackboard economics. In theoretical models, variables are limited, logic is clear, and everything can be derived through beautiful equations. But in the real world, the situation is much more chaotic. Take stagflation as an example. Economists will immediately think of the classic case in the 1970s and try to use the model at that time to analyze today's situation. However, today's world is fundamentally different from the 1970s. Globalized supply chains, digital economies, unique political environments, and unprecedented central bank interventions have made simple historical analogies very dangerous. The Fed's own economic forecasts fully expose the limitations of the model. The New York Times pointed out that in their internal forecasts, the inflation rate forecasts for the end of this year ranged from 1.3% to 4.1%, the GDP growth rate ranged from 0.2% to 3.2%, and the unemployment rate ranged from 3.6% to 5.2%. It is worth noting that this is only the 70% forecast range after eliminating the most extreme possibilities. This is an astonishing dispersion. It shows that even the Fed economists with the richest data and the most complex models cannot reach a relatively consistent view on the direction of the economy in the next 6 months. This once again confirms Powell's modest words: making predictions is a difficult thing, especially in this period. When theoretical models cannot provide clear answers, it is not difficult to understand why economists create new terms such as stagflation light. This is actually an admission that reality is too complex to fit into any existing theoretical framework. For investors, this means that we cannot blindly believe in any economic theory or model. These theories can provide us with a framework for thinking, but they can never be used as a Bible for actual operations. When an economist confidently predicts a recession or boom on TV, we should remember that the model behind him may have ignored the small business owner who is worried about the cost of beer cans, who is precisely the smallest and most solid unit of the real economy. After the above layers of analysis, we seem to have come to a slightly pessimistic conclusion: the Federal Reserve itself is trapped in the fog, the media reports are superficial, and the economists' models often fail. So, as an ordinary investor, what can we believe in? How should we make decisions? The answer may be hidden in ourselves. Our real advantage is not that we have more data or more complex models than professionals, but that we can understand and feel the pulse of the economy from the perspective of an ordinary consumer, trust our own eyes and common sense, and speculate on what may happen from the perspective of human nature. When you find that the price of the can of peaches you usually buy in the supermarket has increased from $2.50 to $2.60, you have personally experienced inflation. When you see that the price of oil has increased by 5% in a week at the gas station, you understand the impact of energy prices on the cost of living. When your friends are laid off because of the company's profit squeeze, you understand the real situation of the families behind the macroeconomic data. These first-hand data from daily life are no less valuable than the CPI report released by the Statistics Bureau. Because they are more real and specific, and can help us understand the most fundamental driving force behind economic phenomena, human behavior. The owner of the fruit cooperative must find a way to transfer costs in order to survive. The beer manufacturer may hesitate between raising prices and changing packaging in order to maintain market share. The mother who buys snacks for her children may choose to buy potato chips because the price of popcorn has risen. These micro-level decisions, when combined, constitute the direction of the macroeconomy. If an investor can deeply understand the dilemma of the can manufacturer and understand the game between him and suppliers, retailers, and consumers, then his understanding of the inflation transmission mechanism may be deeper than that of economists who only look at macro data. So, how should we deal with the information from the Fed? The answer is, treat the official statements of the Fed and Powell's speech as an important reference. It tells us what the most powerful players in this market are thinking at the moment and what risks they see. It's like looking at a lighthouse when sailing, which can tell you the general direction and dangerous reef areas. However, we should be extremely skeptical of the economic forecasts released by the Fed, especially the dot plot. Even they themselves admit the difficulty and huge uncertainty of forecasting, so why should we regard it as an oracle? As for all other second-hand information, media interpretations, analysts' forecasts, economists' models, we can basically regard it as market noise. Most of the time, these noises will only increase our anxiety and interfere with our judgment. In the end, a successful investor should be a pragmatic skeptic. He respects the knowledge of experts, but never blindly follows authority. He pays attention to macro data, but he believes more in his observations from the micro world. He understands theoretical models, but he understands the complex manifestations of human nature in the real world. He will listen carefully to what the Federal Reserve says, but he will pay more attention to what the fruit canning cooperative is doing. Because he knows that the latter is the most real and solid gear that constitutes the huge machine of the economy. In this era full of uncertainty, abandoning the fantasy of accurate predictions, returning to common sense, and trusting your own eyes may be the most reliable way to invest. The above is a little information and personal opinion shared with you today. Thank you for your company, and I hope we can make progress together.